the thing that I found endlessly fulfilling about farming was this constant problem solving, this constant, no matter what it is, whether it's we can't find the right market for this crop, how do we solve that? Or we've got this insect pest problem, how do we solve that? Or the irrigation isn't running the way it's supposed to, how do we solve that? Constantly something new being thrown at you, some new curveball, and always trying to flex that creative muscle about how to do it quickly so that your crops don't die, and how to do it cost effectively.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Mike Lewis introduces us to one of NCAT's newest staff members, Dan Birnstihl. To say Dan has wide-ranging experience is something of an understatement. From working on fighter jets while in the Marines, to studying sustainable agriculture and managing a farm, to studying audio production in Nashville, Dan brings a lot to the table. He says he's particularly interested in NCAT's Arm to Farm training for veterans and in finding ways to use his multimedia skills to make NCAT's ATTRA and other sustainable agriculture resources even more useful and easier to use. Let's listen.
Hello, everybody. This is Mike Lewis from the NCAT Northeast office. Here today on this episode of Voices from the Field. I'm real excited to introduce one of our newest specialists, actually based out of the Northeast office with me, Dan Birnstihl. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's great to get a chance to sit down with you. You know, we were talking before we started recording this. We had a brief intro call, but I think it's always nice just to get a little bit more time with a team member.
Yeah, no, and I'm excited. You know, everything from our brief conversation and everything I've heard from Andy prior to you coming on, I'm excited for the opportunity. Selfishly to work with you. I know you're here to support farmers, but I always like to learn myself. So I'm excited about that opportunity, especially with your specialties. You know, I think you bring a lot to the table. But I want to start this just by asking what got you interested in agriculture? I think there's always so many fascinating stories about why people get into farming or agriculture. So maybe if you could just take a few minutes and tell us what got you into agriculture and what sort of gave you the bug that we all share.
Yeah, sure thing. You know, I think it was a kind of a list of many things that drew me toward agriculture. I was not born into agriculture, far from it. I'm a first generation farmer. My dad was a salesman. My mother worked in the hearth industry, you know, working with wood stoves and pellet stoves. And I think what brought me to agriculture was this list of jobs that I had along the way. The first job I had at 16 was landscaping, which was great, you know, working with plants. And I always gravitated toward the fruit trees. My thought process was, you could plant all these different things in your yard, but if you could, instead of just planting a regular tree, plant a fruit tree and you get fruit from it, why not do that? So that always kind of stuck with me, even though at that point I didn't have a garden. I didn't have any fruit trees or anything like that. So come to find out later on, it's not quite as easy as all that. But at 18, I joined the military. I spent 5 years in the Marines working on F-18s, which was interesting. You know, it's definitely a different perspective to get into. And then once I got out, I just held a ton of different odd jobs. A lot of them were working with my hands, built silos for raw plastic materials for a little while. I worked in auto body for a little while. I also, which is now relevant to my career here at NCAT, I attended a school in Nashville, Tennessee for audio engineering for about a year, learned kind of the ins and outs of how to record music. And that has transferred over to this path. But I think what ended up drawing me to agriculture was just this desire to kind of blend the mechanical aspect of all the different jobs I had done with wanting to grow my own food. And so at the time, you know, I moved around, traveled a little bit. And when I first got back to New Hampshire, staying with my mother, and I set up a little hydroponic garden down in my basement, and I was growing kale and peppers and collard greens. And I just thought that was great. And when I started dating my now wife, I showed her, you know, I'm like, hey, come on down to my basement, check this out. And she's like, oh no, what is he growing down here? And turns out, you know, it's just self-sufficient veggies. And she said, I see the way that you look at those things. Why don't you kind of tailor your career toward that? It seems you've got a real passion for this. And I still had some time left on my GI Bill. So I went back to college, went to the University of New Hampshire for sustainable agriculture and food systems. Spent about 4 years there, just finishing up my degree. And my last year at UNH, met a restaurateur in Hooksett, New Hampshire, who was planning to start a small farm to supplement his restaurant. We sat down, had about a 3-hour conversation that day about what his plans were, about what my thoughts were on agriculture. And at the end of that, he said, "I'd like to hire you on as my farm director." So I spent 4 years working with him at Hip Peas Farm as the farm director. That's what brought me to where I'm at today.
That's really great. Such an interesting journey. I mean, it's always fascinating when you talk to a veteran, and thank you for your service. I think that you went from F-18s to kale. It's just an interesting sort of journey. One I've made myself. So I'm a mechanic. I don't think they would have let me near one of those. One of the things I want people to understand is sort of your expertise. So if maybe you could give us a little bit of background information on what types of things you did at the farm, where your specific expertise lie in terms of production. That would be really helpful for folks, I think, to hear.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, to start that and to start talking about what we did well, I think I'd like to start by talking about what we did poorly at first. So our first year, I'm a fresh-faced kid out of college. I don't really know how to run a farm, but I've got all these great ideas. And, we spent that winter kind of sitting down with extension agents and planning out what the farm was going to be, working with the restaurant that he owned to see what we would be able to produce. And we landed on a handful of crops that we said, we're just going to focus on these. We're going to do them as best we can and see what we can learn this year. And so we grew tomatoes, cucumbers, basil, and sage. And those were our 4 big crops we wanted to focus on. We thought that the restaurant would really be able to use those. It's not to say we didn't do it all that well, but maybe our planning could have been better. We didn't have any high tunnels or anything like that at the time. We weren't spraying any of our crops. It turned out to be a little bit of a mess. And so at the end of that first year, we dedicated a little bit of area. I wanted to try growing some salad greens. I said, I've seen one of my buddies growing these. They worked out well for him. We'll just have these as a little test crop off to the side. And at the end of the year, 33% of our sales were from the salad greens. So we, at the end of the year, went, okay, we need to totally rethink this operation. So we had gotten 2 high tunnels built, which were great. We're in New Hampshire, so tough to really get anything going for a full season unless you've got some way of season extension. So we got 2 high tunnels, which are, for those that may not know, they're greenhouses, but they're more temporary. It's not built on a concrete platform. You're still growing in soil, but it's, covered area. We had 2 30-foot wide by 52-foot long high tunnels. And the next year, we really leaned into that salad greens, some baby root vegetables. We put our tomatoes in the high tunnel. We put cucumbers in the high tunnel, and we did a lot better. We were still selling to the restaurant primarily, and that was a bit of a challenge for us. So the following year, we really started to refine things further. We got 2 more high tunnels that were 30-foot wide by 96-foot long. We entered a few more markets. We got a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, with 90 members. The following year, we entered a farmer's market. And we really got a handle on some of those crops we were growing. Some of the things that I feel like we did really well, aside from our salad greens, which ended up working out great, were our tomatoes. We started grafting those ourselves, doing some interesting trellising methods to try to get as much production out of those as we could. And we started, we were a no spray farm. We didn't use any sprays at all. We used that as a marketing opportunity for us. So instead of just being organic, we could take it a step further and say, we don't use any sprays at all, which, creates some challenges when you could just use a pyrethrin spray or something else on striped cucumber beetles. We didn't have that tool in our tool chest. So by year 4, every year we had run into this big stumbling block of our cucumbers are just not producing. We'll plant them, we'll start growing them. They'll get to be about 3-4 feet tall. Striped cucumber beetles come in, squash beetles come in, and by the time they're 5 or 6 feet tall, they're dying off just from the physical injury and from bacterial wilt. And so we'd about a week before we anticipated them to die, we'd plant another planting, put them in another area. So we're constantly playing this cat and mouse game, and it just didn't work out for us. So I said, all right, this is our last year. We're going to try to find a solution for this. And if we don't do it, we're just not growing cucumbers anymore. And what we decided to do was wrap our entire high tunnel in insect netting. So there was no place where air could get in or out without passing through this insect netting. And it worked out great. All of a sudden, our cucumbers were producing more than we could imagine. It was a little warmer in there, which was a little unfortunate. We went with a smaller hole size than was necessary to try to keep aphids out and thrips and stuff like that. And maybe learned that wasn't the best idea. But by the end of that year, our challenge was no longer having enough cucumbers to take to market. It was that every time we'd sell 150 pounds of cucumbers, we'd harvest 200 pounds of cucumbers. So, it was a good problem to have, that we decided next year we'll reduce our number of cucumber plantings and use that extra space in the high tunnel for melons or something else. But that was really, aside from growing my own food, which was always great to bring home that big CSA basket at the end of the day to grill a bunch of veggies with my wife. The thing that I found endlessly fulfilling about farming was this constant problem solving, this constant, no matter what it is, whether it's we can't find the right market for this crop, how do we solve that? Or we've got this insect pest problem, how do we solve that? Or the irrigation isn't running the way it's supposed to, how do we solve that? Constantly something new being thrown at you, some new curveball, and always trying to flex that creative muscle about how to do it quickly so that your crops don't die, and how to do it cost effectively.
Noting the sort of systems thinking approach that you apply, and sort of relating that back to your engineering with the F-18. So, I think this is great. It sounds like your expertise is great. You've got a great background of systems thinking and troubleshooting, and then a wealth of production experience in high tunnels. But I want to shift focus a little bit too. You said your degree was in sustainable agriculture and food systems. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about how, the market problems or food systems work that you hope to do or have done, or how that portion of your education ties into your work today.
Yeah. One of the things I really wanted to start focusing on as soon as I can is probably the biggest tool that helped me as a farmer was, and it's not sexy, it's not fun, but it's just good record keeping and good crop planning. It was never fun to do. It was always a big pain in the winter to sit down when I don't really want to be thinking about farming. We did a little bit of winter growing, but it's never as hectic and chaotic as the summertime. So you take that as a little bit of time to try to recharge your batteries. And now I got to sit down at a computer for weeks at a time and figure out my crop planning. But when we started to do it well, everything else just became easier. And it became this, you had mentioned markets. We started with a backwards approach where we said, it wasn't what do we want to grow, where are we going to plant it, anything like that. We started with what are our markets and how much can they take per week. And I had a talk with somebody in NCAT just the other day about how they would do their planning for livestock. And they said, well, we've got a couple birthing cows. We get some calves that come, we take them to auction whenever they're ready, and we pick up a check the next week. And I'm going, I am not naive enough to think that livestock raising is all sunshine and roses, but in that one isolated area, I'm so jealous, because for fresh veg, it is constantly this trying to navigate, having enough products to take to market so that you're selling all of it, ideally all of it, and hopefully there's just a little bit more demand than you can meet. That to me was ideal. You never want to fully saturate the market so everyone's happy. You want to leave them, wanting a little bit more. But if you're taking home, you bring 100 pounds of salad greens to market and you're bringing home 50, that's not good for anyone, because you spent all that time and energy planting that crop, raising it, harvesting it, washing it, bagging it, bringing it to market. And now you bring it back to your coolers and go, now I got to spend more time this week figuring out how to move this crop in the next 2-3 days, or it's wasted. So I would really spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our numbers were as close as possible. And once we had that kind of plugged in, we'd work our way backwards and say, okay, this is how much we need each week. When do we need to plant to do that? Where are we going to plant it? How much space is it going to take up? How much time is it going to take to do that? And so one of the projects I want to do first and foremost is try to work on one of those packages to show to other farmers that may be struggling with their record keeping, to help them create one of those.
It's such an important and often underused or undermanaged portion of any operation. I mean, even on mine. One of the other things I found humorous was you said that you wanted to start with your failures, and I think that's always, I always say that I'm not an expert. I mess up a lot and take really good notes. I think that's true. I mean, there's so many more lessons in failure, and I think that's one of the things that draws me to agriculture personally too. It's just that there's nothing is consistent as you want it to be.
Absolutely.
So every day the challenges are different. Tell me about we're so excited to have you. I'm excited to have you here now. Just talking to you now, I have 47 questions over here that and sadly I'll probably be last in the queue, but that's all right. But what do you hope to do and accomplish, right? What are your goals at NCAT? Or I mean, you said you want to create a record keeping tool for producers, which we all could use for sure. But what other types of things do you hope to accomplish, and what do you hope to do here with us?
Yeah, I think the big thing that was so exciting for me when I was talking to Andy, the director of the Northeast branch, about coming to NCAT, one of the projects that really jumped out at me was the Arm to Farm program. I mean, just that chance to work with veterans who want to transition into agriculture. It's such a, you'd mentioned that it's not quite intuitive when you look at it from the outside. Like, you went from F-18s to working on crops, right? But as you said, you've made that transition. I've made that transition. And countless other vets have either made that transition or want to make that transition. I think there's something about it that really appeals to a lot of veterans, that it's working in nature, but it's also something that's very system focused. So it makes sense. That has always appealed to me, because I wish I had known about this program when I was transitioning to agriculture. I think that having that direct influence, not only with educators who are working with farmers and veterans, but also other veteran farmers, is invaluable. Just that real world experience. You're kind of joking about how you've made a lot of mistakes, but taken really good notes. I think that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Someone who's very knowledgeable about something has spent all the time in the world researching it, and they can tell you how it all works from a theory perspective. And sometimes that is the most valuable thing you can have. But wisdom, I feel like, that's banging your head against the problem. And then once you bang it a different way and you go, that one worked, and you just kind of notch that one down. And sometimes all of the theory in the world cannot account for that real world variability that's going to come in and throw everything off. And I think they both are so important. So I'm super excited about that project. And I'm attending my first training this year, just to kind of soak it in and learn. And then hopefully a little bit later on, I'll be attending my first one as an educator. I'm also really excited to bring some of my audio and video engineering skills to the team. And one of the things I really want to hang my hat on is making sure our educational materials here in the Northeast and in NCAT as abroad are as high quality as possible. I had a little bit of chance to work with UNH Extension before joining NCAT, and my time with Extension and my time as a farmer has showed me that there are such great educational materials out there. And sometimes the hardest thing is just getting that translated to a form of media that's easily digestible by farmers. A lot of times farmers do not, we need to get this information, but we don't want to sit down for an hour or an hour and a half and watch something that is about as exciting as paint dry. And it's a shame, because sometimes it can be exciting if it's presented in the same way. I don't think that I'm a master at getting that done, but I want to work on that, see if I can take some of this great knowledge and great wisdom that people here at NCAT and some of our farming cohorts have, and see if I can translate that to a way that is more easily digestible by farmers.
That's great, and I think there's plenty of opportunity with the Arm to Farm program. I think there's quite a few of those coming up in the next couple of years. I'll actually be attending my first one coming up here as well, but I think I'm getting thrown into the fire, and I'll be there as an educator. Well, it's really interesting to hear your excitement about that, and I think that your perspective that you were just talking about, with the problem solving and the record keeping, I think that that's going to bring a lot of value to the program. So excited to hear that you're coming into that world as well. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that I want to talk about? What's your favorite color, or something exciting or interesting?
I'm excited to do a little bit of gardening now. That's a little bit less high stress. My wife and I got really into sucrine when I was a farmer. These little mini romaine heads. We'd cut them in half. We'd baste them with some salad dressing and do them on the grill. About a minute on each side, and they were so good. But it's a little bit different when you're trying to get those things to market, and then you're like, hey, I got a few extra, I'll bring them home, versus having a nice little garden. I can kind of make that my little zen area. So, but I'm just really excited to join the team. I feel like getting to talk to everyone on the team a little bit, and then getting to talk to everyone in NCAT as a whole has just been really fantastic. It just seems like such a great community to work with. So I'm excited to see how I can contribute, how I can be a valuable member to the team. And
Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.incat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT'S ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.